massacre. Now, one thing we've noticed of late is everybody seems to be jumping on the bandwagon, and this includes the likes of Julius Malema, and we've seen even other organizations like the South African Black Muslim Conference. They've issued a statement making all sorts of assumptions. Now, there was a piece that was written by Professor Paulus Zulu, Race Relations Unit at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, and he says regarding this issue, racial tensions were framed by instigators of the unrest. It's easy to call this a racist attack. Therefore, we make pronouncements, particularly dangerous pronouncements, which we need to know the facts and conduct proper analysis, saying there's a lot of fake news that is going out. And also, at the end of the day, we've seen statements like the South African Black Muslim Conference talking about if the perpetrators were Muslims, talking about statistics, and these statistics talking about 300 bodies in the Phoenix mortuary, which the Health MEC in KwaZulu-Natal says that there's much less than 300, and all bodies cannot be or cannot relate to what had taken place in the, as far as the unrest is concerned. Also, at the same time, calling on Muslim organizations to condemn and says, in fact, the South African Black Muslim Conference says that they're still waiting on Muslim organizations. Now, this letter was dated the 22nd of July, but prior to that, on the 19th of July, we've seen a statement also come out from UPSA. Now, someone who has written and particularly expressed concern with regard to the misguided threats and attempts to intimidate, that's Julius Malema, has been Advocate Mahomed Saleem Khan, who's written this piece. Advocate Mahomed Saleem, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jummah Mubarak to you.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And Jummah Mubarak to you and to the listeners, Inayet.
Yes, now, Advocate Mahomed Saleem, you know, we've seen a lot of people jumping onto the bandwagon, and this includes Julius Malema. Now, this is a person who obviously wakes up at the most opportune time to take advantage of the situation that persists. Now, you've written this piece and you've made it very, very clear without any ambiguity with regard to these misguided threats and attempts by Julius Malema.
Yes, Inayet, I've also responded to similar threats by Julius Malema's underling, which is the BLF. You know, that's the organization that champions the cause of black ownership of land, or the pursuit to acquire ownership of all the land in South Africa. They also, as you very aptly put it, jumped onto the bandwagon and were extremely critical of Indians in general. And I found that no one was really effectively responding to the subversion of the truth by them and by Julius Malema. And I had to jump to the assistance of the truth. So I did not write in order to support any particular group or community. If you look at the publication, the text message that was disseminated by me, you will see that I make reference to Julius Malema and others who are attempting to view this entire matter from a racist perspective as themselves being racist and exploiting the position and to try and garner advantage from this. The position essentially is this. There was an uprising, and yes, there had been political influence, etc. But at the end of the day, there was an uprising. There was danger to life. There was threat, serious threat to property. And Inayet, we must point out to the listenership that as recently as 14th of July, 2021, there was a publication by the government in the Government Gazette, which made reference to the right to employ self-defense in protection of oneself, in protection of other people, and in protection of serious threat to property. So here it is, it's an affirmation in terms of our law to conduct ourselves in a manner that is commensurate with the fair and just enforcement of our rights. Now, when I say us and I say our rights, I'm not referring to any particular group or racial group. I'm referring to those people who are under threat. If your life is under threat, if the lives of people around you are under threat, if your property is under serious threat of destruction, you are entitled to defend yourself. And that very provision makes reference to the discharge of bullets, of firing of live rounds. And it also makes provision that if live rounds are fired, then this must be reported to the police. The circumstances under which those live rounds were fired must be explained, and the consequences of firing those live rounds. So in essence, one must contextualize the entire thing. Look, there was an uprising. One, was there threats to life? Yes, there was. In fact, when one looks at the balance, there were lives lost on both sides. That is, lives of looters and plunderers and lives of people who were defending their property. So there were lives lost on both sides, point one. There were more lives, according to reports in the press, of lost of plunderers and looters. But in terms of the law, were those people who were under threat, serious threat of property being damaged? All you need to do is look at the reports, look at the pictures about the serious damage done to property, look at the injuries sustained by parties, lives lost, etc. And you see that those people who acted in self-defense acted within the law. Just go to this publication of the Government Gazette. Take note, lawyers who are listening to this interview, 14th of July 2021. Have a look at the provisions there, and if you're defending people in courts of law, use that provision. And there again, I'm not taking sides here, Inayet. I'm not saying that when someone is defending a particular segment of the community, use that. Anyone. In fact, I mean, I've seen publications of certain people who might be termed as being from the African grouping, who were critical of what was happening, who had joined neighborhood watch groups in order to protect the areas where they live. So that is why I say, in essence, what happened is the people of South Africa, the citizens, civilians, in unison, arose in order to protect themselves and their properties, and they did so. They acted in terms of law. It's unfortunate that lives were lost. Whenever life is lost, it's a highly unfortunate thing. But when you subject yourself to criminality, and when you attack people, and when you destroy property, then you're subjecting yourself to the risk of retaliation and to the risk of being injured and to the risk of losing your life. Now, if you subject yourself to that and you lose your life, then in terms of the law, provided the person who inflicted whatever injury it was or whatever force that culminated in the plunderer and looter losing his life, provided he acted within the confines of the law and within the confines of this particular publication I've referred to, then he has a good defense and he has the right to be acquitted in a court of law. So in essence, Inayet, from the perspective of what actually happened and the manner in which the BLF and Malema and perhaps there's some other groups who are presenting this as an abuse by Muslims or as an abuse by Indians, that is incorrect. One has to be objective. One has to analyze it. If there has been an abuse, if there's been a case where someone who was not really under threat of harm or his property was not under serious threat of damage, but then he used force, killed someone, that is murder then. Or injured someone, then that is assault without good cause, and he or she must be dealt with in accordance with the provisions of the law. And it doesn't matter what the race is. But I think what we need to do is we need to be alive to the fact that there are political personalities who are attempting to exploit this particular position in order to gain capital out of this. And that is the dangerous thing, because they're inciting racial hatred. That in itself is a crime. You'll see from my message to Malema, I tell him that if he persists with this misconduct, and it was in response to a radio interview that he had where he was highly critical, subverted the truth, and adopted a highly bullying attitude, as did the BLF with regards to Indians, the so-called Indians, and it was a response to those stances that I issued the message. I thought one had to balance the playing field, one had to be truthful, and that was the reason, Inayet. But in addition to that, the other point that you make, which is extremely relevant, is that there are people trying to make capital out of this. If you look at a publication in I think it's in the Daily News, a day or two ago, and Premier of KZN, Fihle Zikalala, says something to the effect that force should not have been used. What ought to have been done is the plunderers and looters ought to have been arrested. Now, let's look at the practicality of such a suggestion. This is a war zone with plunderers and looters converging upon an innocent residential area in large numbers. The police are completely inactive. They're not even present. Now, under those circumstances, which is likened to a war, imagine one focusing on arresting the plunderers and looters. If you now endeavor to arrest them, you will be killed. Your property will be damaged. So one has to be objective about these occurrences. One has to be truthful about these occurrences. You know, it's all very well playing to the sentiments of the public because you want votes, etc., and making comments. But these comments that are inaccurate themselves, though might not be intended to incite racial hatred, could very well do so. I mean, take the statement of Premier Fihle Zikalala. I'm highly critical of that. When assuming he's reported correctly, I mean, sometimes there are misreports in the press, but assuming he is reported correctly, and assuming he did say, well, force ought not to have been used, these people were only plundering and looting, and what ought to have been done is they ought to have been arrested. First question is by who? Because the police were not present. Secondly, imagine going to arrest a marauding group that is converging upon you, armed with tangas and all sorts of things, and who are intent on destroying property and removing any obstacle in their way. So if you stand in their way, you get erased. Imagine being expected under those circumstances to effect an arrest. But now, having said something like that, you've injected into the mind of the populace that this particular group that was defending itself had acted incorrectly and unlawfully. Now, you see, one has to be mature in one's approach. One has to be fair and one has to be just. You don't subvert the truth and you call a spade a spade. If someone's done wrong, they must be prosecuted. If they've not done wrong, then I think it is highly unjust to denigrate them, to defame them, and to incite racial hatred directly or indirectly against them, Inayet. And then again, you know, what about the principle of Ubuntu? You know, we must not pay lip service to these things. Ubuntu is not there just for a particular context. It is there generally. And, you know, what are the characteristics of Ubuntu? Peace, harmony, love, empowerment, and essentially improving the country, our country. This cliche of Indians being from India and they must return to India, this is highly offensive. It is as offensive as the use of certain black derogatory terms that have found, the use of which have found people in court and being penalized, etc., and rightly so, Inayet. But this cliche of Indians going back to India must be viewed in the same context. And there again, I'm not championing the cause of Indians when I say this. All I'm saying is it is unfair, it is unjust. We are in a state where corruption is rife, and we need to focus ourselves on improving the country, on joining hands, joining forces, being constructive. This is what we need to do. We must empower the masses. We must provide homes for the masses. We must dignify the poor so that they have responsibilities. They have something to protect. They have their families who are accommodated in these dwellings, which might be humble. Jobs should be provided. The government should work towards this. If you empower a nation, if you dignify a nation, they'll think twice about plundering and looting and subjecting themselves to the risk of death and injury, because they've got something to protect. They have something to look forward to. So it all boils down eventually, Inayet, to the unfortunate reality that there's a lot to be done to develop South Africa. And Inayet, one has to give credit where it is due. And we are taught virtually from the cradle to the grave that when you do something with the right hand, your left hand should not know about it. In other words, when you engage in an act of charity, when you give things to the poor, for example, and the needy, then don't publicize it. And for that reason, the majority of the people in South Africa are not aware of the acts of charity that are conducted by the Indian community. And I speak in terms here. And now I've got to be specific because this is the community which has spent substantial, vast sums of money. And I know personally exceeding billions of rands from the pre-COVID era, going into COVID and emerging after COVID. In fact, Inayet, there are people who continue to distribute hampers, food hampers, etc., among the impoverished, notwithstanding the riots and notwithstanding the destruction that was perpetrated. They are going back and assisting the very people who have perpetrated these heinous acts of looting and plundering, etc. Now, it's about time, I think, that there was some degree of publication about these phenomenal acts, which people engage in. So the people of South Africa will appreciate that the so-called Indian community, and I don't like to type count, and I don't like to speak in terms of racial groups, etc. But people have to come to terms with the fact that this group, which is denigrated and which is threatened and which is bullied because of their passivity generally, and this is the first time that they stood up together with other civilians in order to defend themselves. This group has contributed so meaningfully to our country, not only from a commercial perspective, but generally from the act of giving of charity, etc. So Inayet, all in all, I felt it was necessary for there to be a response to Malema's usual cliche, to the BLF's usual cliche, something which has not really effectively been responded to. People jump onto the bandwagon and make political capital out of it. And the poor group that is being denigrated, the poor group that is being criticized, has not defended itself up to now. So that is what motivated me, and that is why there were those publications.
Well, Jazakallah for that, Advocate Mahomed Saleem. It's been an absolute pleasure having you with us this morning. We wish you a wonderful Jummah, inshallah, and I'm sure this is not the end of this discussion. There's going to be a lot more discussions regarding this particular aspect, but for now, we wish you all the best, inshallah. We wish you safety. Allah protect you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Shukran.
What makes Randery Jewelers the optimum place for your memorable gift?